Howdy and welcome back. This week is Module 3, Chapter 3. In this week, you will do your first lab. So make sure you do your discussion posts and your labs. Again, my name is Brennan Crow and welcome to Cyber Privacy. So today we're going to talk about standards and best practice documents that provide guidance to designers and implementers. Frequently, organizations treat these documents as source-specific requirements in policies, procedures, design, and implementation for the following reasons. 1. Government agencies and private sector customers may require contractually that a providing organization conform to certain standards as a condition of providing a service. Now, if an organization can demonstrate that it has faithfully implemented the guidance and standards and best practices documents, this may limit its liability in the event of a privacy breach. Now, these documents represent the collective experience and wisdom of a broad range of concerned government and industry groups, and hence provide authoritative guidance as to the best ways to achieve the production and protection of PII. Before we look at the source of requirements for the protection of PII, this chapter begins in section 3.1 and 3.2 by discussing the characteristics of PII and other forms of personal information. Section 3.3 covers one of the earliest sets of requirements used for the development of privacy regulations, and one that is still in use today. This is known as the Fair Information Principles Practice. In Section 3.4, this provides an overview of information on privacy regulations. Section 3.5 and 3.6 cover standards and best practices respectively. In the context of information system, privacy deals with the protection of information about individuals that can be stored and transmitted. Standards, regulation, and laws in the United States make this concept more specific by the term personally identifiable information. NIST SP 800-122, Guide to Protecting the Confidentiality of Personally Identifiable Information, defines PII as follows. Any information about an individual maintained by an agency, including 1. Any information that can be used to distinguish or trace an individual's identity, such as name, social security number, date, place of birth, mother's maiden name, or biometric records, and number 2, any other information that is linked or linkable to an individual, such as medical, educational, financial, and employment information. SB 800-122 clarifies the terms that are important in this definition as follows. Distinguish an individual. This is information that can be used to identify a specific individual such as name, passport number, or biometric data. In contrast, a list of items containing only credit scores without any additional information concerning individuals would not be sufficient to distinguish an individual. Trace an individual. This is to process sufficient information to determine a specific aspect of an individual's activities or status. For example, an audit log containing records of user actions could make it possible to trace an individual's activities. Linked information. Information about or related to an individual that is logically associated with another information about that individual. Linkable information. Information related to an individual for which there is a possibility of a logical association with other information about the individual. For example, if two databases contain different PII elements, then someone with access to both databases might be able to link the information from the two databases and identify individuals, as well as access additional information about or relating to those individuals. If secondary information, the source, if the secondary information source is present on the same system, or closely related to that system does not have security controls that effectively segregate the information sources, then the data are considered to be linked. If the secondary information source is maintained more remotely, such as in an unrelated system within the organization, available in public records or otherwise readily attainable, like through an internet search engine or any kind of other database, then the data is considered to be linkable. The definition of PII just given is wide, and many other countries use similar definitions to delimit the items that needed to be protected. An even broader term, personal data, is used by the General Data Protection Regulation of Europe. This is GDPR, which was a law in the European Union and came into force in May of 2018. GDPR defines personal data as any information relating to an identified or identifiable natural person, aka a data subject. An identifiable natural person who can be identified directly or indirectly, in particular, by reference to an identifier such as a name, an identification number, location data, an online identifier, or to one or more factors specific to the physical, physiological, genetic, mental, economic, cultural, or social identity of that natural person. There are four key elements to the GDPR definition. Any information. In essence, the GDPR considers that any data that can be used to identify an individual as personal data. It includes, for the first time, such things as genetic, mental, cultural, economic, and social information. There may be a wide variety in the nature of and the content of that information, as well as the technical format. The term relating to. This phrase implies that the regulation applies to information that relates to an individual on the basis of its content, purpose, or results. This phrase also covers information that may have an impact on the way in which an individual is treated or evaluated. The phrase identified or identifiable. Now, to determine whether a person is identifiable, account should be taken of all the means likely reasonable to be used to identify the person, and the principles of protection shall not apply to data rendered anonymous in such a way that the data subject is no longer identifiable. A natural person. A natural person is a real human being, as distinguished from, say, a corporation, which is often treated, in the law they treat it as a fictitious person. In the United States, as well as in many other countries, a somewhat restrictive view is taken of PII, which frequently focus on whether the data are actually linked to an identified person or not. In contrast, EU privacy laws and regulations, culminating in GDPR, are more expensive and broadly define PII to encompass all data that can be used to make a person identifiable. As pointed out in the California Law Review article, Reconciling Personal Information in the United States and the European Union, in the EU interpretation, even if data alone cannot be linked to a specific individual, it is reasonably possible to use certain data in combination with other information to identify a person. Then that information is considered to be PII. As with broader interpretation of PII is used in the recently published California Consumer Privacy Act, aka known as the CCPA, which they define the term personal information as any information that describes, relates to, describes, is capable of being associated with, or could reasonably link directly or indirectly with a particular consumer or household. Individuals share PII with a variety of organizations for a variety of purposes. Chapter 2 shows that there's a list of examples of PII. The following are examples of PII. Government issued identification. For example, driver's license, passport, birth certificates, pension, medical benefits identifiers, like in the United States, Social Security numbers and Medicaid numbers. Contact information. This can be your email address, physical address, or telephone numbers. Online information can be like your social media identifiers, like from Facebook or Twitter or whatever, and passwords and pins used for that. Geolocation data, that's from smartphones, your GPS devices and cameras. That can be PII. Device information, such as your IP address that's connected to the internet or your MAC address connected to a local area network, can be considered PII. Verification data, for example, your mother's maiden name, pets, children's names, high school, all that kind of stuff. Those are PII. Medical records, such as prescriptions, medical records themselves, exams, and medical images, are PII. Biometric and genetic information, such as fingerprints, retinal scans, and DNA. The digitized versions of those are PII. And of course, account numbers, such as your bank, insurance, investment accounts, debit, and credit card numbers. Those are considered PII also. Organizations also collect and store PII based on the role of the individual in relation to the data collected by the organization. Examples include parent, citizen, employee, consumer, investor, patient, internet user, hobbyist, and volunteer. Now, how sensitive is PII? Now, although organizations have a duty to protect all PII, both as a matter of policy and regulatory requirements, they frequently make a distinction between sensitive PII and non-sensitive PII. The implication of the designation of some PII as sensitive is that the release of such information would have a greater impact of some sort than would the release of non-sensitive PII, on the other hand. Uh, Therefore, an organization should have stronger policy controls for sensitive PII. There is no widely accepted definition of sensitive PII. For instance, the IAPP, or the International Association of Privacy Professionals, proposes the following general definition: data which is more significantly related to the notion of reasonable expectation of privacy, such as medical or financial information. However, data may be considered more or less sensitive depending on the context or jurisdiction. Now, on the other hand, the OECD Privacy Framework document, which is OECD 13, states that, quote, it is probably not possible to identify a set of data which are universally regarded as being sensitive, uh, close quote. Now, an organization can make the distinction between sensitive and non-sensitive PII by enumerating specific items. Um, for example, the U.S. Department of Commerce defines sensitive PII as, quote, PII which, if lost, compromised, or disclosed without authorization, could result in harm, embarrassment, inconvenience, or unfairness to the individual, close quote. Now, the document lists the following types of PI as sensitive when associated with an individual. This includes social security number, including the truncated form, like, hey, your last four digits of your social security number, your place of birth, your date of birth, your mother's maiden name, your biometric information, medical information, including brief references to absences of work, personal financial information, credit card, purchase card, account numbers, passport numbers, potentially sensitive employment information such as your performance ratings, disciplinary actions, results of background investigations, your criminal history is also PII, and information that may stigmatize or adversely affect an individual. Examples of nonsense PII include an individual's name, work email address, and work phone number. The context is important in determining the sensitivity of PII. PII that might not include elements of normally identified as sensitive may still be sensitive and require special handling if it's compromised, could cause substantial harm, inconvenience, embarrassment, or unfairness to an individual. For example, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security provides the following examples in the Handbook for Safeguarding Sensitive PII. A collection of names is not SPII. It's not PII if it is a list, a file, or query result of A. Attendees of a public meeting or stakeholders who subscribe to a DHS email distribution list. If sensitive PII is a list, file, or query with the result of law enforcement personnel, for instance, investigators, agents, support personnel, employee performance ratings, or employees with overdue mandatory training course completions, then that could be considered to be PII itself. Figure 3.1, based on a figure in the article, experimentation with personally identifiable information, illustrates the position of PII within the totality of information maintained in an information system. As previously mentioned, some portion of PI is sensitive PII, depending on the specific listing or definition of sensitive PII categories. However, PII is only a subset of all of the information related to persons that may exist in an information system. Personally identifiable information, simply put, information that leads to the identification of a unique individual. De-identified persons information. This is information that has had enough PII removed or obscured that the remaining information does not identify an individual, and there is no reasonable basis to believe that information can be used to identify that individual. Anonymous personal information. This is information not related to an identified or identifiable person, and this cannot be combined with any other information to re-identify individuals. It has been rendered unidentifiable. And of course, now the last one is aggregated group information. This is information elements abstracted from a number of individuals, typically used for the purpose of making comparisons, analysis, trends, or identifying patterns. De-identification of data refers to the process of removing or obscuring any personally identifiable information from individual records in a way that minimizes the risk of unintended disclosure of the identity of individuals and information about them. Anonymization of data refers to the process of data de-identification that produces data where the individual records cannot be linked back to an original, as they do not include the required translation variables to do so. Anonymization of data is a process of de-identification for which a code or other means of association for re-identification does not exist. Anonymization is commonly used by government agencies to release data sets to the public for research purposes. It is also useful for system testing. Robust testing involves simulating real conditions as closely as possible so that it should not involve testing real-world data. However, because of the process and operational burdens involved in protecting PII, it is more efficient to work with an anonymized data set. In many cases, organizations can perform useful work on personal information without having PII. For example, for some forms of research, research planning and examination with correlations and trends. Frequently, de-identification process is done in such a way that the organization can re-identify the data. Re-identification is the process that reestablishes the relationship between personally identifiable data and de-identified data. The organization can then achieve this by using a code, an algorithm, or a pseudonym that is assigned to an individual record, with the enabling information protected by encryption or by other means. Another approach is to encrypt identifying elements within data records. There is, however, a risk of an adversary has the ability to re-identify data records used by using publicly available information to deduce the identity associated with an individual data record. Anonymization of data is a process of de-identification for which a code or other means of association for re-identification does not exist. Anonymization is commonly used by government agencies to release data sets to the public for research purposes. It is also useful for system testing. Robust testing involves simulating real conditions as closely as possible, and so it should involve real testing real world data. However, because of the processing and operational burdens involved in protecting PII, it is more efficient to work with anonymized data sets. Aggregation of group information should remove all PII. An example from SP 800-122 is the aggregation and use of multiple sets of de-identified data for evaluating several types of educational loan programs. The data describes characteristics of loan holders such as age, gender, region, and outstanding loan balances. With this data set, an analyst could draw statistics showing that 18,000 women in the 30 to 35 age group have outstanding loan balances greater than $10,000. Although the original dataset contained distinguishable identities for each person, the de-identified and aggregated dataset would not contain linked or readily identifiable data for any individual. Aggregation, in the sense used here, involves abstracting and summarizing properties about groups of persons. This is the sense used, for example, in the GDPR, which states, where personal data is processed for statistical purposes, this regulation should apply to that processing. Statistical purposes mean that any operation of collection and processing of personnel data necessary for statistical surveys or for the production of statistical results. Those statistical results may further be used for different purposes, including a scientific research purpose. The statistical purpose implies that the result of processing for statistical purposes is not personal data, but aggregate data, and that the result or the personal data shall not be used in support of measures or decisions regarding any particular natural person. ENSA also used this in the term of aggregate in defining a design pattern for privacy. That says the fourth design pattern, aggregate, states that personal data should be processed at the highest level of aggregation and with the least possible detail in which it is still useful. Aggregation of information over groups of attributes or individuals and restricts the amount of detail in personnel data that remains. This data, therefore, shall become less sensitive if the information is sufficiently coarse-grained and the size of the group over which it is aggregated is significantly and sufficiently large. Here, coarse-grained data means that the data items are general enough that the information stored is valid for many individuals, hence little information can be attributed to a single person, thus protecting privacy. Even aggregated data can pose a privacy risk. NIST SP 800-188, or which is demystifying government database or de-identifying government databases, gives the example of a school that uses aggregation to report the number of students performing below, at, or above grade level within a range of time. For example, if there are 29 students performing above grade level, the entity is 20 to 29. Part of Table 3.1 shows the totals for a given period of time. Part B of Table 1 of 3.1 shows the results where the table is republished after a new student enrolls. And by comparing the two tables, one can readily infer that the student who joined the school is performing at above grade level. Unfortunately, the term aggregation is used in the privacy literature in two senses. The one provided above and to refer to the consolidation or combination of multiple data sets on the same or overlapping sets of individuals. For example, a paper called A Taxonomy of Privacy provides the following definition. Aggregation is the gathering together of information about a person. A piece of information here or there is not very telling, but when combined together, bits and pieces of data begin to form a portrait of a person. The whole becomes greater than the parts. This occurs because combining information creates synergies. When analyzed, aggregated information can reveal new facts about a person that she did not expect would become known about her when the original isolated data were collected. Usually the reader can discern the sense of the term from the context. Figure 3.2 illustrates the degree of privacy risk associated with various categories of personal information. We'll break this down in Chapter 7, Privacy and Databases, where we examine those concepts in greater detail. A set of fair information practice principles, FIPS, as it's otherwise referred to, is for the protection of personal information and was first enunciated in 1973 report of the U.S. Department of Health, Education, and Welfare titled Records, Computers, and the Rights of Citizens. The Hugh report listed 5 principles. It is useful to review what the Hugh report cited as the essence of the privacy objective. Personal privacy as it relates to personal data record keeping must be understood in terms of the concept of mutuality. Accordingly, we offer the following formulation. An individual's personal privacy is directly affected by the kind of disclosure and the use made of identifiable information about him in a record. A record containing information about an individual in an identifiable form must, therefore, be governed by procedures that afford the individual a right to participate in deciding what content of the record will be and what disclosures and use will be made of the identifiable information in it. Any recording, disclosure, and use of identifiable personal information not governed by such procedures must be proscribed in an unfair information practice unless such recording, disclosure, and use is specifically authorized by law. In 1980, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, otherwise known as the OECD, expanded this to a list of 8 principles. These 8 principles are widely considered as minimum standards for the protection of individual privacy. The OECD principles function as high-level set of privacy requirements suitable for an organizational privacy policy and as guidelines for the design and implementation of information privacy mechanisms. Table 3.2 lists the OECD FIPS, and these are principles are still relevant, and many standards, regulation, and organizational policy statements employ some version of these principles. These principles enumerate standards of practice intended to ensure that entities that collect and use personal information provided adequate privacy protection for that information. The OECD document uses the same definition of personal data that is subsequently used in the GDPR, namely any information relating to an identified or identifiable natural person. The OECD document defines this term data controller as a party who is competent to decide about the contents and use of personal data, regardless of whether such data are collected, stored, processed, or disseminated by that party or by an agent on its behalf. It is useful to elaborate somewhat on the implications and meaning of the 8 OECD principles as follows. Collection limitation. Companies should only collect the personal data that they need to accomplish a specific business purpose. Similarly, government organizations should limit collection of personal data to what is needed for a given mission. Organizations should obtain consent from an individual before collecting or processing that individual's personal data. There are exceptions. such as for data needed for law enforcement or national security purposes. Next comes data quality. This principle highlights two concepts: relevancy and accuracy. With respect to relevancy, an organization should only connect information that is not only relevant to a specific purpose, but also limited to the amount and type of data that is actually needed. With respect to accuracy, an organization should ensure not only that the data is accurate when collected, but that the data integrity is maintained so long as the data is held and processed. In addition, where possible, an organization should provide means for a subject to review and correct personnel information. Purpose specification. Organizations should provide notice of the specific purpose for which personal data are collected and should only use, process, store, maintain, disseminate, or discuss personal data for a purpose that is explained in the notice and is compatible with that purpose for which personal data was collected or that is otherwise legally authorized. Use limitization. This principle reinforces the limits for data processing as well as the expectation of data subjects. It also places a burden on organizations to assure that if personal data is transmitted or made available to another party, the use limitations remain in force. Security safeguards. Organizations should enforce the same security mechanisms and procedures for PII as are used for other sensitive data. These safeguards include confidentiality, integrity, availability, and authenticity. The security measures include physical measures such as locked doors, identification cards, locked cabinets, such as that, organizational measures like authority levels with regard to access to data, and technical measures, for example, access control mechanisms and firewalls. Technical measures are also called technical controls, or safeguards, or provide countermeasures for information systems that are primarily implemented and executed by the information system through mechanisms contained in the hardware, software, or firmware components of the system. Openness. Organizations should make their privacy policy documents readily and publicly available. The OECD lists the following examples of additional measures: regular information from data controllers on a voluntary basis, publication in official registers of descriptions of activities concerned with the processing of personal data, and registration with public bodies. The phase means with which are readily available. And just let me repeat that. Which are readily available. This implies that individuals should be able to obtain information without reasonable effort as to time, advanced knowledge, traveling, or so forth, without an unreasonable cost. Individual participation. As with the principle of openness, this principle implies that there is a user-friendly process for individual participation. Participation includes the right to obtain confirmation of whether the data collector has one's personal data, have one's personal data communicated to him or her, and challenge data relating to him or her, and have data modified or erased if appropriate. Accountability. This principle dictates that the individual, the data controller, that is in charge of determining how personal information is going to be processed and used will be held responsible for ensuring that the data are processed in an authorized, fair, and legitimate manner. Of course, breaches of privacy will raise issues of accountability not only for the data controller, but for the organization as a whole. Accountability refers to accountability supported by legal sanctions, as well as accountability established by codes of conduct and contractual obligations. One of the most comprehensive initiatives is the European GDPR, or the European Union General Data Protection Regulation. This was approved by the European Parliament in 2016 with an effective enforcement date of May 2018. The GDPR is designed to harmonize data privacy laws across Europe to protect and empower the data privacy of all EU citizens and to reshape the way organizations, both public and private, across the region approach data privacy. This presentation, 10 Key Facts Businesses Need to Know About GDPR, from the 2016 European Identity and Cloud Conference, summarizes the most important aspects of GDPR that organizations that do business in Europe need to be aware of. The GDPR applies to all companies worldwide that process personal data of EU residents, both EU citizens and non-citizens. Any company that works with information relating to EU citizens must comply with the requirements of GDPR, making it the first global data protection law. This aspect alone is contributing significantly to all companies around the world taking data privacy more seriously. The GDPR widens the definition of personal data compared to prior regulations by EU member states. As a result, parts of IT that have been unaffected by data protection laws in the past will now need attention from businesses to ensure compliance with the new regulation. The GDPR tightens the rules for obtaining valid consent to using personal information. Having the ability to prove valid consent for using personal information is likely to be one of the biggest challenges presented by the GDPR. GDPR states that the consent of a data subject means any freely given, specific, informed, and unambiguous indication of his or her wishes by which the data subject, either by a statement or by a clear affirmation actions, signifies an agreement to personal data relating to him or her being processed. The GDPR requires public authorities processing personal information to appoint a data protection officer, as well as other entities within the core activities require regular and systematic monitoring of data subjects on a large scale, consisting of processing on a large scale of special categories of data. The GDPR mandates data protection impact assessments. Data controllers must conduct assessments where primary breach risks are high in order to minimize risks to data subjects. This means before organizations can implement projects involving personal information, they must conduct a privacy risk assessment and work with the data privacy officer to ensure that they are in compliance with project progress. The GDPR requires organizations to notify a local data protection authority of a data breach within 72 hours of discovering it. This means that organizations need to ensure that they have technologies and processes in place that will enable them to detect and respond to a data breach. GDPR also introduces the right to be forgotten. This is also known as data erasure. The right to be forgotten entitles the data subject to have the data controller erase his or her personal information, cease further dissemination of data, and potentially have third parties halt the processing of data. The conditions for erasure include the data no longer being relevant to the original purposes for processing, or the data subject withdrawing consent. This means that organizations will have to get fresh consent before they can alter the way they are using the data they have already collected. It also means organizations have to ensure that they have processes and technologies in place to delete data in response to requests from data subjects. The GDPR requires that privacy be included in systems and processes by design. At its core, privacy by design, referring to data protection by design in the GDPR, calls for the inclusion of data protection from the onset of the designing of systems rather than as an addition. GDPR is an important landmark in the evolving integration of privacy and cybersecurity. Even organizations unaffected by this regulation should be aware of its provision, considering them in designing their own privacy controls. There is no single law or regulation covering privacy in the United States. Rather, a collection of federal privacy laws that cover various aspects of privacy, and there are some state laws that do this too. Some U.S. privacy laws only apply to federal agencies and contractor companies working under the federal contract. Others impose mandates on private organizations as well as government agencies and departments. These include the Privacy Act of 1974, which specifies the rules that a federal agency must follow to collect, use, transfer, and disclose an individual's PII. The Fair and Accurate Credit Transaction Act of 2003. This requires entities engaged in certain types of consumer financial transactions, predominantly credit card transactions, to be aware of the warning signs of identity theft and to take steps to respond to suspected incidents of identity theft. The Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act of 1996. This is known as HIPAA. This requires covered entities, typically medical and health insurance providers, and their associates to protect the security and privacy of health records. The Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act of 1974. This is known as FERPA. This protects students and their families by ensuring the privacy of student educational records. The Graham-Leach-Bliley Act of 1999, GLBA. This imposes privacy and information security provisions on financial institutions designed to protect consumer financial data. The Federal Policy for the Protection of Human Subjects, published in 1991 and codified in separate regulations by 15 federal departments and agencies, outlines the basic ethical principles including privacy and confidentiality and research involving human subjects. The Child Online Privacy Protection Act, otherwise known as COPA. This governs the online collection of personal data information from children under the age of 13. The Electronic Communications Privacy Act. This generally prohibits unauthorized and intentional interception of wire and electronic communication during the transmission phase and unauthorized accessibility of electronically stored wire and electronic communications. ISO, or the International Standards Organization, is an international entity that develops standards on a wide range of subjects. It is a voluntary, non-treaty organization whose members are designated standard bodies of participating nations as well as non-voting observer nations. Although ISO is not a government body, more than 70% of ISO member bodies are government standards institutions and organizations incorporated by public law. Most of the remainder have close links with public administrators in their own countries. In the areas of data communications, networking, and security, ISO standards are developed in a joint effort with other standards bodies. One is the International Electrotechnical Commission, the IEC. The IEC is primarily concerned with electrical and electronics engineering standards. In the area of information technology, the interests of the two groups overlapped, with the IEC emphasizing hardware and the ISO functioning on software. In 1987, the two groups formed a joint technical committee and this was called JTC1. This committee is responsible for developing the documents that ultimately became the ISO and IEC standards in the area of information technology. ISO has been the forefront of developing standards for the information security. Perhaps the most important set of standards for cybersecurity is the ISO 27000 suite of standards that deal with the Information Security Management System, otherwise referred to as ISMS. An ISMS consists of the policies, procedures, guidelines, and associated resources and activities that are collectively managed by an organization in the pursuit of protecting its information assets. This suite includes requirements documents, which are normative standards that define requirements for an ISMS and for those certifying such systems. Guidelines documents and other things provide direct support along with detailed guidance and or interpretation of the overall process to establish, implement, maintain, and improve an ISMS. The most noteworthy standards are as follows. ISO 27001, ISMS requirements. This is a normative set of standards that provide a mandatory set of steps as part of an information security management system, against which an organization can certify its own security arrangements. In this example is a defined target environment, assess risks, and select appropriate controls. ISO 27005. This is a code of practice of information security controls. This is an informative standard that provides a framework of security controls that can be used to help select controls required in the ISMS. ISO 27002. This is the Information Security Risk Management System Implementation Guidance. This is a standard that provides information security risk management system implementation guidance, including advice on risk assessment, risk treatment, risk acceptance, risk reporting, risk monitoring, and risk review. This standard includes examples of risk assessment methodologies. ISO 27001 and 27002 are of great importance to organizations because they have the universally accepted means of achieving security certification. Certification is the provision by an independent body of written assurance that the product, service, or system in question meets specific requirements. Certification can be useful as a tool to add credibility by demonstrating that a product or service meets the expectations of an organization's customers. In the case of a security certification using ISO 27001, it is a way for executives to be assured that the security capability that has been funded and implemented meets the security requirements of the organization. For some industries, certification is a legal or contractual requirement. A number of independent certification bodies provide this service, and tens of thousands of organizations have been ISO 27001 and 27002 certified. ISO 27001 and 27002 are of great importance to organizations because they have become the universally accepted means of achieving security certification. Certification is a provision by an independent body of written assurance that the product, service, or system in question meets specific requirements. Certification can be useful to add credibility by demonstrating that a product or service is, meets those needs internationally. It's a way for executives to be assured that the security capability has been funded and implemented for the security requirements of that organization. For some industries, certification is a legal or contractual requirement, and a number of independent certification bodies provide the service for that. More recently, the ISO has begun developing privacy standards that serve as companions to the requirements and guidelines standards in the 27000 series. ISO was added the following to the 27000 series. ISO 27701, an extension of ISO IEC 27001 and ISO IEC 27002 for privacy information management requirements and guidelines. This specifies the requirements for and provides guidance for establishing, implementing, maintaining, and continually improving a privacy information management system. This is based on the requirement control objectives and controls in ISO 27001 and 27002, and extended by a set of privacy-specific controls. Now we have ISO 27018. This is a code of practice for protection of personally identifiable information in public clouds as PII processors. Specific guidelines based on ISO IEC 27002, taking into consideration the regulatory requirements for the protection of PII, which can be applicable within the context of information security and risk management environments of a provider of public cloud services. ISO 27701 is particularly significant because of the potential for certification. Certification bodies are likely to add ISO 27701 certification to their offerings in the future. As pointed out, ISO 27701 gives privacy a visibility that wasn't there before. It ties to solutions within organizations, gives structure to accountability, and promotes cross-team work between security and privacy teams that justify expenses for the privacy office. In addition, ISO has developed a 29100 series of documents that provide specific guidance in implementing privacy protections. ISO 29100, the Privacy Framework. This provides a high-level framework for the protection of personal, identifiable information within information and communication technology systems. As a general nature and places organizational, technical, and procedural aspects in an overall privacy framework. ISO 29134, Guidelines for Privacy Impact Assessment. This provides guidance on process for performing impact assessments and structure and content of privacy impact report. ISO 29151. This is the code of practice for personally identifiable information protection. This offers guidelines for PII controllers on a board on a broad range of information security and PII protections that are controls, and these controls are commonly applied in many different organizations that deal with the protection of PII. We have DIS 29184. This is the guideline for online privacy notices and consent. The draft international standards provides general requirements and recommendation for online notice. It includes a list of requirements for providing notice, recommended contents of notice, and recommendations for providing consent. Figure 3.3 illustrates the relationship between the 27000 series and the 29100 series of documents. Take a moment to review this slide, pause the video if you need to, and continue on to the next slide. ISO 20889, Privacy Enhancing Data De-Identification Terminology and Classification of Techniques. This focuses on commonly used techniques for de-identification of structured datasets, as well as on datasets containing information about data principles that can be represented logically in the form of a table. The ISO 29100 Privacy Framework is a general model that indicates the key parties involving in protecting PII and the privacy principles that an organization should implement to achieve privacy goals. This framework serves two purposes. One, it provides high-level guidance to organizations for identifying, assessing, managing, and communicating about privacy risks and solutions. Two, it serves to introduce and define key elements and consideration that lead to other standards in the 29100 series. Now, ISO 29100 also provides a narrative of the basic elements that comprise a privacy framework. Topics covered in a general way include actors and roles, interactions, PII, privacy safeguarding requirements, privacy policies, and privacy controls. ISO 29100 defines 11 privacy principles shown in Table 3.3. These are similar to the OECD FIPS. ISO views the privacy principles as a set of shared values governing the privacy protection of PII. The organization, and specifically the PII controller, should ensure adherence to these principles during the storage, processing, and transmission of PII under the organization's control by implementing the necessary privacy controls. A key aspect of the standards is the identification of actors involved in the processing of PII and their interaction, which consist of the PII principal, which is a natural person to whom the PII relates to, and is also referred to as a data subject. Privacy stakeholder. This is a person, an agency, or organization that can affect or be affected by activity related to a PII processing. More generally, the term stakeholder also refers to a person, a group, or an organization that has an interest or concern in an organization. Some key examples of stakeholders are managers, employees, creditors, directors, governments and its agencies, and the owners or shareholders, suppliers, unions, and the community from which the organization draws its resources. The PII controller. This is a privacy stakeholder who determines the purposes and the means for PII. The PII processor. And this is a privacy stakeholder who processes PII on behalf of and in accordance with the instructions of a PII controller. The PII controller and the PII processor may be the same entity. Definition of a third party. This is a privacy stakeholder other than the PII principal, the PII controller, or the PII processor. Figure 3.4 shows the ways in which the privacy actors interact. The arrow lines indicate a flow of PII. A PII principal can provide its PII to a PII controller. As for example, when registering for a service provided by a controller, a PII principal can also provide PII directly to a PII processor, perhaps subsequently to registering with a PII controller. The controller can provide PII to a processor to perform authorizing processing of the PII. The PII principal can request relevant PII from the controller, which can then be delivered by the controller or by the processor as directed by the controller. A PII controller can also provide PII to a third party, as long as the transfer is governed by privacy principles, or can direct the process to provide PII to a third party. This model is very general, but it serves to delimit the areas of concern that make an organization that must address protecting the PII itself. ISO 29151 complements and extends ISO 27002 to encompass privacy. It provides guidelines for organizational information security standards, information security management practices, including the selection, implementation, and management of controls, taking into consideration the organization's information privacy risk environments. ISO 29151 consists of two parts. The first part has the identical structure to ISO 27002, listing the same set of controls. As shown in Table 3.4, the two standards list 14 control categories and a total of 34 subcategories of controls. As discussed in Chapter 2, these areas where existing security risk models and security-focused guidance also apply to privacy concerns. Thus, in ISO 29151, for many of the categories and subcategories of security controls, the standard simply says that the guidance in ISO 27002 applies. For some subcategories, ISO 29151 provides additional implementation guidance relevant to the protection of PII. The lesson to be drawn from the first part of ISO 29151 is that a substantial portion of the work needed to protect PII is already provided in the design and implementation of security controls to manage risk. The second part of ISO 29151 contains a set of PII protection-specific controls that supplement those given in ISO 27002. These new PII protection controls, with their associated guidance, are divided into 12 categories. The first category indicates the topics that a privacy policy should cover. The remaining 11 categories correspond to the 11 privacy principles of ISO 29100. So look down at table 1.3 or down back to table 3.3 for that reference. For privacy principles, ISO 29151 provides a detailed list of privacy controls. Now, it is not intended for an organization to be required to implement all of the privacy controls defined in ISO 29151. Rather, the standard attempts to provide a rather comprehensive set of controls, and an organization should implement those that are appropriate based on its privacy impact assessment. NIST is a U.S. federal agency that deals with measurement, science, standards, and technology related to U.S. government use and to the promotion of U.S. private sector innovation. Despite its national scope, NIST Federal Information Processing Standards, aka FIPS, special publications, the SP, and internal reports, NIST IR, have worldwide impact. In the area of information security, the NIST Computer Security Resource Center, CSRC, is the source of a vast collection of documents that are widely used within the industry. As part of an ongoing development of standards and guidelines for information security, the CSRC has extended its concern to information privacy. These documents produced by the CSRC fall into three broad categories: privacy controls, privacy engineering, and privacy framework. To counter privacy threats and comply with government laws, regulations, and organizations, there is a need for a set of privacy controls that encompass the privacy requirements and the response to legal requirements. Two NIST documents are invaluable. NIST 853. This is the security and privacy controls for information systems and organizations. This document provides a very detailed, comprehensive set of privacy controls. Next comes SP 853A, assessing security and privacy controls in federal information systems and organizations. This document provides a set of procedures for conducting assessments of security controls and privacy controls defined in SP 853. SP 853 controls are organized into 20 families, with each family defining one or more controls related to the specific topics of the family. For each control, the document provides a description of the control, supplemental guidance on implementation, a description of the control enhancements, and references to other documents. Two of the families are concerned only with privacy requirements. See the diagram table 3.5. 15 of the families, designated as joint, include controls that address only security requirements. Now, these controls address only privacy requirements and/or controls that address both security and privacy requirements. One of these is access control. These controls are what determine the setting used for limiting access to systems and information stored on the systems. Next comes awareness and training. These controls are related to developing policies and procedures for user awareness and operator training. Audit and accountability. These controls are used to record policy violations and its related activities. The family also provides guidance on log retention policies and configurations. Assessment, authorization, and monitoring. These controls for assessing and monitoring the implementation of security controls and for specifying authorization process for control use. Next comes configuration management. This focuses on a baseline establishment and identifying the minimal software installations. Many of the important details concerning the change control and configuration management are described in this family. Next one is contingency planning. These controls define the auditable settings for backups and recovery of systems. Next comes identity and authentication. This focuses on the configuration settings concerned with authentication systems. This controls the provide detailed guidance on tracking users employed by the organization, as well as for guests, contractors, shared accounts, and service accounts. Incident response. This identifies auditable settings to support incident response efforts. Media protection. This provides information on how to maintain the security of digital media. By offering guidance on how to configure media controls, the classification markings, the storage policies, and the usage, this family can assist in an organization in making digital assets more secure. Planning provides guidance on information security architecture and describes the overall philosophy, requirements, and approach organizations take with regard to protecting the security and privacy of information. Program Management. This provides guidance on facilitating complex with applicable laws, regulations, and standards. In addition, the audits in this family provide the vehicle for an organization to document all the security controls within a central repository. Next line is risk assessment. This provides guidance on the requirements to perform risk assessments. Systems and services acquisition is the next line, and this provides guidance on using software-based systems. Next comes systems and communication protection. This provides guidance on how to implement protected communications for a system. All right, and then we come to systems and information integrity. This provides guidance on monitoring information systems affected by announced software vulnerabilities, email vulnerabilities such as spam, error handling, memory protection, output filtering, and many other areas of security. Thus, SB 800 provides a collection of more than 100 well-defined and specific controls from which an organization can select and implement those that meet its privacy requirements. In addition, SB 153A provides guidance in the form of assessment template for assessing each of those controls defined in SB 853. The current version of SB 853A does not include these controls that are unique to privacy, but only those controls that overlap both security and privacy. A newer revision will incorporate the remaining controls. Table 3.6 lists the primary specific families. One is individual participation. This addresses the need to make individual active participants in the decision-making process regarding the collection and use of their PII. By providing individuals with access to PII and the ability to have their PII corrected or amended as appropriate, the controls in this family enhance public confidence in organizational decisions made based on the PII. Privacy authorization. This ensures that organizations identify the legal basis that authorize a particular PII collection or activity that impacts privacy and specify in their notices the purposes for which PII is collected. These controls will be embodied in a policy statement. NIST has produced a set of documents that provide guidance to privacy engineers. NIST IR 8062 defines three privacy engineering objectives that serve to complement the traditional security objectives. The privacy engineering objectives are intended to provide a degree of precision to encourage the implementation of measurable controls for managing privacy risk. System designers and engineers working with policy teams can use the objectives to help bridge the gap between high-level privacy principles and their implementation within systems. The three objectives are predictability, manageability, and disassociability. Predictability. This enables individuals to have a confidence in the manner of the use of their PII, and both their PII and that of others. Achieving predictability is essential to building trust. The goal is to design systems so that stakeholders are not surprised by the way in which personal information is handled. Predictability enables data controllers and system administrators to access the impact of any changes in an information system and implement appropriate controls. Even in a system that may create unpredictable or previously unknown results, such as large data analysis or research effort, predictability can provide a valuable set of insights on how to control privacy risks that may arise. For example, if the results of a study are inherently unpredictable, operators can implement controls to restrict the use of those results. Manageability. This enables fine-grained administration of PI, including alteration, deletion, selective disclosure of the data. Manageability is not an absolute right, but a system probability, or a system property rather, that allows individuals to control their information while minimizing potential conflicts in system functionality. Consider a system in which fraud detection is a concern. In such a system, manageability might limit the ability of the individuals to be able to edit it or delete information themselves, while enabling a appropriately privileged actor to administer changes to maintain accuracy and fair treatment of individuals. Now, disassociability enables a data system to process PII or events without associating information with individuals or devices beyond the system's operational requirements. Some interactions, such as providing health care services or processing credit card transactions, rely on privacy but also require identification. Unlike confidentiality, which focuses on preventing unauthorized access to information, disassociability recognizes that privacy risks can result from exposures even when access is authorized or as a byproduct by a transaction. The principle allows system designers to deliberately weigh identification needs against privacy risks at each stage of design. These privacy engineering objectives are intended to provide a degree of precision and measurability so that system designers and engineers working with policy teams can use them to bridge the gap between high level principles and practical implementation within a functional system. Take a moment to pause and look at this table. This indicates which objectives relate to each of the OECD's FIPPS or FIPS. The following are additional NIST documents related to privacy engineering. First one is it's SP 800-122, Guide to Protecting Confidentiality of Personally Identifiable Information. This provides practical context-based guidance for identifying PII and determining what level of protection is appropriate for each instance of PII. The document also suggests safeguards that may offer appropriate levels of protection for PII, and it provides recommendations for developing resource plans for incidents involved in PII. The next one is SP 800-188, De-identifying government data sets. This provides guidance regarding the selection, use, and evaluation of de-identification techniques. And then we have NIST IR 8053, the de-identification of personal information. This summarizes the main aspects of de-identification and re-identification. The NIST Privacy Framework is a voluntary tool that organizations can use to better identify, assess, manage, and communicate about privacy risks so that individuals can enjoy the benefits of innovative technologies with greater confidence and trust. Further, the privacy framework is designed to provide high-level alignment with NIST cybersecurity framework. This section provides an introduction to both frameworks. In response to the growing number of cyber intrusions at U.S. federal agencies, Executive Order 13636, Improving Critical Infrastructure Cybersecurity, directed NIST to work with stakeholders to develop a framework for reducing cyber risks to critical infrastructure. The resulting NIST cybersecurity framework includes leading practices that a variety of standards bodies have deemed successful. This framework is a collection of best practices, practices that improve efficiency and protect constituents. Although provided for federal agencies, the document is of use for non-government organizations. The NIST cybersecurity framework consists of three components. The first being the core, which provides a set of cybersecurity activities, desired outcomes, and applicable references that are common across critical infrastructure sectors. Next are the implementation tiers. These provide context on how an organization views cybersecurity risk and the processes in place to manage that risk. Profiles. This represents the outcomes based on business needs that an organization has selected from the core categories and subcategories. The framework core identifies 5 key functions that comprise an organization's cybersecurity risk management approach. Each function is divided into a specific number of categories, each of which in turn is divided into a number of more detailed subcategories. for a total of 23 categories and 106 subcategories. The functions provide a high-level view of the elements that comprise risk management for the organization. These categories are a group of cybersecurity outcomes that closely tied to programmatic needs and particular activities. Each category is further divided into specific outcomes of technical and or management activities. These subcategories provide results that will, while not exhaustive, help support achievement of the outcomes in each category. Now, tied to each category is a list of informative references, each of which is a specific section of standards, guidelines, and practices that are common among critical infrastructure sectors and that illustrate a method to achieve the outcomes associated with each category. The NIST privacy framework is designed to help organizations consider the following. 1. How their systems, products, and services affect individuals. 2. How to integrate privacy practices into organizational processes that result in effective solutions to mitigate these impacts and protect the individual's privacy. Now, as with the NIST cybersecurity framework, the NIST privacy framework comprises core profiles and implementation tiers. Table 3.9 shows there are 5 key functions that comprise, I can never say that word, comprise the framework's core and the functional categories for each function. The framework offers dozens of actions that a company can take to investigate, mitigate, and communicate its privacy risks to both users and executives within the company. Figure 3.7 illustrates how the functions in the two frameworks relate to each other. The two frameworks have been structured in such a way as they provide guidance on how to perform security and privacy risk management in an integrated and coordinated fashion. In addition to regulations and standard documents, there are a number of professional and industry groups that have produced best practice documents and guidelines that information privacy designers and implementers will find useful. The most important such document is a standard of good practice for information security. This is produced by the Information Security Forum. This is a 300+ page document that provides a wide range of best practices that are the consensus of industry and government organizations. One section of this document is devoted to privacy. In regard, another important source of information is the Cloud Security Alliance, which, as the name suggests, is devoted to security measures for the cloud providers. However, many of the best practices for the cloud providers apply in other contexts also. This section provides an overview of the ISF and CSA documents related to privacy. The Information Security Forum, otherwise known as ISF, is an independent, not-for-profit association of leading organizations from around the world. Through ISF, its members fund and cooperate in the development of a practical research program in information security. It is dedicated to investigating, clarifying, and resolving key issues in cybersecurity, information security, and risk management, and to develop best practice methodologies and processes and solutions that meet the business needs of its members. ISF members benefit from harnessing and sharing an in-depth knowledge and practical experience drawn within their organization and developed through an extensive research and work program. The most significant activity of ISF is the ongoing development of the standard of good practice for information security. The current version of the SGP was issued in 2018. The document is business-focused, comprehensive guide to identifying and managing information risks in organizations and their supply chains. The breadth of the consensus in developing the SGP is unmatched. It is based on research projects and input from its members, as well as an analysis of the leading standards on cybersecurity, information security, and risk management. The goal is the development of best practice methodologies, processes, and solutions that meet the needs of ISF members, including large and small business organizations, government agencies, and nonprofit organizations. The SGP provides a detailed checklist for each topic that is covered. For the information privacy topic, the SGP provides guidance and recommendations in the following areas. 1. High-level working groups. The organization should establish a high-level working group responsible for managing information privacy issues and overseeing the information privacy program. This group should appoint a chief privacy officer or a data protection manager to coordinate the information privacy activity. It also needs to appoint other individuals to monitor and advise on privacy-related matters and manage privacy-related implementations. It also must be aware of privacy-related regulations, the locations of PII within the organization, and the purpose for all PII. Next, we'll talk about Information Privacy Program. The organization's information privacy program should identify and protect PII throughout its life cycle, which includes creation, storage, processing, transmission, and destruction. They must develop a privacy awareness program and must perform privacy assessments as needed, and then also perform privacy audits as needed. Information privacy policy. The organization should publish an information privacy policy that covers the acceptable use of PII, 2. Requirements for protecting different types of PII, 3. Rights of individuals whose PII is held, 4. Requirements for privacy assessments, awareness programs, and compliance programs. Next comes deployment of privacy-related technical controls and specific policies and procedures for managing PII through its life cycle. After that, we come to individual participation. The organization should facilitate individual participation in the storage and use of their PII in accordance with FIPP. We also come to technical controls. The organization should select and implement technical controls including encryption and encryption key management, data masking, such as via pseudonym, data obfuscation, and data de-identification or data scrambling, which involves concealing parts of information when being stored or transmitted. And then comes tokenization, which replaces valid information database fields with random information and provides authorized access to this information via the use of tokens. Protecting privacy-related metadata such as document attributes or descriptive information that may contain information such as the name of the person who updated the file. And finally, we come to data breaches. The organization should establish a method of dealing with data privacy breaches, including identifying breaches, responding to breaches, and notifying relevant parties. The Cloud Security Alliance is dedicated to defining and raising awareness of best practices to help ensure a secure cloud computing environment. CSA draws on the subject matter expertise of industry practitioners, association governments, and its corporate and individual members. 2 privacy-related documents from CSA are noteworthy. First is the Privacy Level Agreement. This is a compliance tool providing cloud services in the European Union. And then is the Code of Conduct for GDPR compliance. Although both documents address concerns related to the EU, these documents are useful and informative for all regulatory environments worldwide. The Privacy Level Agreement often doubles as a structured way to communicate the level of personal data protection offered by a cloud service provider to customers and potential customers. The document provides suggestion for content in the following clauses of the PLA. Identity of the CSP or cloud service provider, its role, and contact information for all data protection inquiries. Ways in which the data will be processed, the data transfer, the data security measures, how it is monitored, personal breach notifications, data portability, migration and transfer assistance, data retention, restitution and deletion, accountability, cooperation, and then legally required disclosure. The Code of Conduct for GDPR compliance also addresses the PLA. In addition, it provides detailed guidance for information privacy governance. Topics include certification and code of ethics, government bodies, roles and responsibilities, and governance processes and related activities. Well, congratulations if you made it through this long lecture. We have explained the concept of PII sensitivity. We've discussed the different types of personal information. We understand that the OECD FAIR practice of implementation principles. Uh, we present an overview of the EU GDPR regulation. We summarize important U.S. privacy laws. We present an overview of privacy-related standards and present an overview of privacy-related standards and documents from NIST. Now, this was a lot to cover. Please do your lab and complete your discussion posts. Thank you and have a great week.